So, hello everybody. Welcome to Beyond Closing. My name is Victor Simmerall. Today we have a special guest with us. He is probably the most successful self-made real estate investor that I know, and he's going to talk to us about his how he got into real estate, how he came to this country, and just a little bit about what makes him tick. So, I'm going to introduce you, Borko Milosev. Borko, welcome. Nice to.
Thank you, Victor, for having me. That's a very generous introduction. We got to expand your network.
Well, I don't know. You're a very humble person. I know you for a while, but only really got to know you a little better recently.
Yeah,
And we had a few interesting conversations. That's why I really felt like I really would be so privileged for you to come in. Well, actually, you are. Where are you coming to us from? You're at your home, and
yes, I'm working from home, like probably most of the world or most of the valley, and have been for the last now almost 2 months.
sure. Our office is both Allen and Bethlehem, close to the public, but it's just three people here. We're working at different ends of the office. All of our staff are working remote. But so Borko, tell me a little, tell everybody a little bit about what you do,
Sure,
your accomplishments to today, and then let's go back to where you grew up.
sure. So, I call myself a real estate developer or investor. We have I owned a company called Post Road Management, which is based in Bethlehem. We own and manage. We self-manage only our own projects, and
So,
we have a
your office is in the building right on Elizabeth Avenue and Linden Street, the tall building there.
correct. Yep, 65 East Elizabeth, which we can talk about later if you would like. That was one of our projects.
I, okay, go ahead.
We basically, I look at it kind of at two different buckets. We have about 1,500 apartment units in and around Lehigh Valley that we own and self-manage. And then we have about 16,000 apartment units in 15 states, which we run in a partnership and on behalf of a wealthy New York City family, where we don't manage. We are essentially acting as an operating partner and an asset manager, and have a third party management company out of Detroit, Michigan. That portfolio is at about $1 billion, and then our Lehigh Valley or Greater Lehigh Valley area portfolio is probably approaching about $200 million. So fairly big AUM or assets under management, and fairly big operation. In Lehigh Valley, probably about 40 employees, and then indirectly on that large portfolio, I would say another 400 employees that work with us.
So I find it fascinating. So a teenager that comes to this country by himself from Serbia, uh, how do you go? And not just the real estate side, but also I want you to talk about the adventurous side of you, climbing
Sure.
the world's tallest peaks. But go back to your talk about your childhood and and what led up to you coming to this country. And go ahead.
Sure. So thank you. I was born, as you said, in Serbia. I lived there till I was 18 years of age. My brother would tell me that even as a young kid, I would watch a movie Wall Street and with Michael Douglas and tell him, I wanted to be I wanted to be on Wall Street and work on Wall Street. And I've been trying to convince my parents from young age that I wanted to come and study abroad, and they kind of granted me that wish, and I ended up coming as an exchange student to study do a senior year in high school, kind of act of God or luck or whatnot. I ended up in Wilson. So I went to Wilson High School. After Wilson, I enrolled into Moravian, where I was, 4 years. Got a dual degree in mathematics and financial economics. And through Moravian, ended up meeting a gentleman that became my mentor and is now one of my principal investors, a gentleman by the name of Rob Verone, who's also a Moravian alum, and who gave me an opportunity to kind of fulfill my dream of working in New York City and working on Wall Street. So in 2004, after graduating Moravian, I went to work in commercial lending on Wall Street. We did something called commercial mortgage-backed securities. And I worked in a group that was called large loan groups. So that was a group that would do loans that were $50 million and above. My biggest loan that I've done while working at Wachovia was the leverage buyout of Extended Stay America, which was a $7.4 billion financing or an $8 billion acquisition. So it was a really great exposure, really interesting experience for a young, 20-something year old kid. I did that from 2004 through 2008. And then, as you know, the kind of market blew up.
Sure.
My boss and my mentor, Rob Verone, who at that time was the co-head of the entire real estate platform for Wachovia and oversaw about $60 billion balance sheet and 800 employees, left and partnered up with a hedge fund called Scoggin Capital and a New York City developer called Belvedere Capital to start this distressed debt buying fund. And I was lucky enough to be his first employee at that venture. I joined in summer of 2008. And as you also may recall, I believe in September, Lehman, blew up and declared bankruptcy. And then in November, Fannie and Freddie essentially got nationalized. So our effort of raising the fund and going into distressed debt acquisition arena, which we hope that we were able to do sort of something similar like RTC days, and make millions fell into water as all the investors were running for the hills, and nobody wanted to. Liquidity was a big issue. People didn't have money, and so on and so forth. So we actually ended up reinventing ourselves and ended up becoming running an advisory shop where we did debt restructuring for about 4 or 5 years. We helped some of the large New York City owners, operators restructure their loans that were now defaulting at a great pace. And that in itself was also a very, very good experience. Gave me a lot of insight. I was able to see and learn on other people's mistakes.
All commercial talking about, correct?
All commercial, yes. So for instance, we did one loan that maybe people would recognize if they watched Dirty Money, but we did 666 Fifth Avenue for Kushner's and President's son-in-law.
Yeah.
They were one of our clients. Actually, as a matter of fact, I could proudly say that we kind of carved ourselves a niche. Because we were first to market to do that, we were kind of a go-to guys for any debt between 50 million and $1 billion, right? There were large restructuring shops like Lazard's of the world that were doing corporate debt restructuring, but as a single asset or even portfolio, frankly. And one of the portfolios that we ended up buying one of the portfolios, that $300 million portfolio, which I mentioned earlier, for that New York City family, and that's how I started that venture. But that was distressed debt type of a deal. And the reason why I'm mentioning all this is because it will kind of make more sense when we talked about how I started in real estate and where I'm going and what my strategy is. It's very opportunistic, and I very much enjoy and thrive in looking at distressed debt, distressed real estate opportunities.
Well,
and it was kind of part of all that training.
It was in your blood for a long time because you were a real estate investor even when you were in school.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Good memory. So
Your
what
first job
happened
was
there is
on West Broad Street in Bethlehem, right?
that's right. That's right. So during college, in order to pay for school, I worked for a caterer uh, on as needed basis. And the gentleman that I worked for was a real estate investor himself. More of a weekend warrior, if you will. And so, as a cheap labor, he would hire me to go and do unit turnouts or, unit cleanouts rather, and unit turnout, and then also to, paint and do a couple of things. And he saw that I was hardworking and had interest, so he took interest in me and would pass along a good book he would read about real estate, or pass a good material. So, for instance, I remember at that time, Carlton Sheets, I believe, had these CDs and infomercials, and so he passed me one of those, and I listened to him. And I still remember getting a book from this gentleman, Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, which fundamentally changed my life. The whole idea of being able to reach financial independence, at that time, what I perceived as a kind of, in a very uh, relatively easy and fast path of a couple of years. And keep in mind that as a college student, I didn't have a very big nut, so I only needed to have a little bit of money, kind of this passive cash flow, to obtain what Robert Kiyosaki called that financial independence. So I figured, with 10 homes, I could be financially independent, and that to me felt very, very easily achievable. So
So,
I knew I wanted that.
so what you're saying is with 10 homes, you could not work the rest of your life as long as your lifestyle.
That was the idea, right?
Yeah. But your
Correct. As long as
lifestyle changed a little bit though, right?
it does, lifestyle does change. But at that time, again, I figured, if I had 300, I mean, if I can make $300 per home, and if I had 10 homes, I would have these $3,000 of essentially cash-free income, right? Because real estate is taxed very favorably, and a lot of income is sheltered for a bunch of years. So I thought, if I bought 10 homes and I had about $300 a month of excess cash flow, and I had $3,000 a month as a college student without debt, that could, certainly set me on the right path, where you're right, I wouldn't have to work. Not that I ever wanted to stop, and I'm not sure that I will ever stop, but that was my goal. And like I said, it felt very, very achievable. So I started looking for homes. It took me probably about 6 months to find the right one. And the first one was a home at 1767 West Broad. It was a hot foreclosure. It was pre-Zillow days. And so I was literally pulling the county, filings, and trying to do my own Zillow and do my own BOVs. And I remember I came up with after renovation value of about 110,000 for a home that I bought for 67,000. And what I ended up doing is kind of getting a bunch of my college buddies, and we did a lot of manual and easy work ourselves, like painting and putting pergo floors and things of that nature. Obviously, hire professionals for more complicated jobs, but there wasn't a lot to do. The idea was, and I think I learned this probably through listening to Carlton Sheets. I went and I did a cash out refi, pulled my equity investment out, and then some money, and kind of used that money to buy a second home, and then a third, and so on, and kind of build a small portfolio. Frankly, first house while I was still in college, and then once I moved to New York, I would commute back and forth and work, on building my real estate portfolio on weekends.
You currently
And
own
that,
that first house.
I'm sorry?
You currently own that first house?
No, I sold it in 2007. I sold
I knew
all of the homes in 2007.
I knew you sold it, but I always wondered, like, are you going to buy that house back again someday? Just
There,
for nostalgia?
there's definitely some sentimental value to it, but I try to keep it, emotions out of it.
I'm sure every time you drive past it, you look over at it.
That's right. More so than any other, for sure.
Yeah,
Very, very proud of that one.
that's a good story. So
Yeah, thank you.
now that was what year was your first house?
2003.
Okay, and then so where did you go from there with real estate?
Yes, so we continued to acquire mainly HUD properties. Um, did it for a couple of years, and then in 2005, at this time I was in New York working at the bank. I stumbled across the first property in a multifamily property that I acquired with a partner. Who's my manager at the bank, different gentleman, one of the MDs, managing directors that I work for, and I remember we bought, it was a 16-unit building on Livingston Street in Bethlehem that we bought in '05, where we uh, bought it, I think it was around 7.5 cap rate, which at that time was possibly low, believe it or not, for '05. But one thing that we noticed was that on this rent roll, looked at, say, two-bedroom apartments, and there was a very big gap between a rental rate. So there was people that were paying $750 for a two-bedroom, and there was a lady that was paying, $500. So we saw this opportunity to kind of bring everybody to market or raise rental rates. And we were able, with our first acquisition, to drive. And I remember it like it was yesterday. I think it was the rental was about $88,000 a year, and we were able to get it to about 110, 120,000 within about 2 years. So it was, as people refer to as kind of that value add acquisition, where, and our value add was, by adding or generating more revenue. And then similar story with single family homes. Once we were able to increase revenues, that increased the NOI. When the NOI increases, all things being equal, the value increases. So we went to another lender. We're able to do a new appraisal, refinance, take our investment out, take the debt, repay the debt, put a new debt on, repatriate all the investments, and had some excess cash flow. And then frankly couldn't buy anything, and that turned out to be the right thing. As a matter of fact, we were net sellers. We sold all the homes in 2007 and didn't buy a multifamily property until 2009. And kind of so for the most part, it was a small portfolio, but what we did have, we kind of dodged the bullet with '08, '07, '08, '09 recession, Great Recession. And then in 2009, we started buying again. I think one of the first buy was a property called Julian Court in Allentown, 1521 West Union Street. And that was a bankruptcy sale. We actually went to a bankruptcy auction, and the same partner, same managing director who I work for directly, him and I auctioned it off and bought that property, 20% occupied, owned by a very bad landlord who now I think is in federal prison, serving jail time for money laundering and defrauding his partners. So, bad story, but it was a very heavy lift. We worked hard on it, and got the occupancy up, fixed the property, renovated all the units, and so on and so forth. And then bought another property right there around the corner, and kind of slowly start building commercial or the multifamily side of the business. And that went on till about 2010 is when I first wanted to quit my New York job, Wall Street job, and come back to the Valley and do this full time. But then my mother was not happy about it, and she would, she persuaded me to reconsider, which I did for about a year. I think she and a couple other friends didn't trust yet that I knew what I was doing, and that I was doing the right thing. So I ended up sticking in New York for another year, 2011. And then in 2011, we had another acquisition of a project in Emmaus, 48 unit in Emmaus, which we're actually in process of selling now. That I finally was like, you know what, I think it's the right thing. I'm doing the right thing. I got to go and do this full time. So I quit January 1st, 2012, basically, and came back to the Valley, and I've been here ever since.
Okay. So your formula, is it pretty much the same on just about all of your investments? So do you look at anything that's a 1 to 4, or is everything
Yeah.
unit over
So
5 units?
yeah. So very very good question, and I think there's a couple of things there that I can answer. So in terms of a formula, my investment approach has changed over time. I love that line that success leaves clues. So, the idea is you don't have to be super original. You can find somebody that's successful and sort of emulate. So, being in New York and working for, for a bank where we were doing lending to these very large borrowers, I got exposed to some very wealthy individuals and got a chance to observe them. So at first, the idea was, never sell, buy something right. And that's the second aspect, which I'll talk about a little later, what means buying right and how we would create values. But, buy it right, if you will, and then own it forever, right? And then going back to also that idea of Robert Kiyosaki, continue to create and increase your passive cash flows over time. And that worked for me for a bunch of years. As of late, I would say in the last 3-4 years, I've changed my strategy under the influence of the gentleman who I have 16,000 apartment units with. He's more of a kind of create value and get out, if you will. And that could still be 3-4-5 years. It's not flipping in the traditional sense of, buying a house and selling it 3-4 months. And there's kind of a mathematical.
What you mean is change the cap rate to your favor.
Or even if cap rate stays the same, right? One way is change the cap rate, correct. If you're buying an asset that is greatly distressed, right? If you buy an asset that's, call it, like we bought that 20-unit building I mentioned on Julian Court, where it was falling apart. The prior owner has been sucking it dry for years, not reinvesting capital. And so that property would be categorized maybe as C minus property. We go in, we spend, call it, I don't know, $500,000 renovating 20 apartments in the building. Now you get into C plus B minus. So yes, you have a change in the cap rate, theoretically. In addition to that, you can now charge higher rental rates because you have a much nicer product. So that's the value that we will create. You can also create value, or discover value, if you will, if you buy distress, right? So buying properties at foreclosures, buying properties that were in bankruptcies, buying notes, which I've done quite a bit, and I really enjoy because I think that the number of people that do that is not that crowded. And I understand it, and it is complicated, but I understand and I actually enjoy working on it. It's kind of almost like playing a chess. And just understanding, given the training that I've had in New York that I mentioned earlier, doing debt restructuring, that distressed debt restructuring. So those are all different ways that you can create value. And sort of going back to what I was talking about, under the influence of the gentleman that I currently work with, one of the partners is that, mentioned selling it once that value is created. So if you kind of think about the life of the investment, you do all these things that we talked about, and mainly it has been spending capital, renovating, upgrading, taking all dilapidated buildings that are falling apart. And a lot of buildings that we've done as of late are buildings that nobody really wants to touch and been sitting vacant for years. Doing all the work, again, creating that value, and then you can continue to own it. And that value, after that point, after you've done all the work, is not going to grow that great any longer. It will grow with some inflationary level, or it will grow, right, if you believe that Lehigh Valley or whatever market you're in is going to grow by itself, right, given the dynamics, supply and demand that are happening in that market. But it's certainly going to be at a slower growth rate than the first part of the investment, which is when we were doing all this work. So just to simplify, let's say that out of $100 that you can make, first $80 I make upfront by doing, again, let's call it all the work, right? Renovating, upgrading, releasing it, et cetera, et cetera. And the remaining 20, and that takes me, say, a year or two. And the remaining 20 might take me 5 years, right? Or 7 years, or whatever your investment horizon is and your whole horizon is. So there's this whole idea of the velocity of your money. And so the theory is that, and it works in practice, is that, once you've created these 80%, once you made your, say, $80 out of 100, if I sell it and I can reinvest it and do the similar deal, right? And if it also took me a year or 2 years, instead of 80, I could have now 160, right? Versus having this 80 and then waiting to get to that 100, and that might take however many years. So the reason why I was able to do well financially and kind of grow my capital relatively quickly is because of that. Like I said, I've only kind of been implementing that strategy in the last 3, 4, 5 years. So that's kind of different investment thesis, and it seems like it's working pretty well for us.
So I guess that strategy would have to be adaptable as the economies change.
Sure, absolutely. And in an economy like today, and God only knows what next 6, 12, 24 month looks like, and with very limited debt availability right now, you may not be able to sell, which we're perfectly fine with, right? We are okay with holding the assets and owning them long term. We always renovate them with that in mind. Even when the opportunity is right to sell, we do look at those things, and we've been fairly busy. I would say over the last 24 months, we've probably sold 24, or 36 months, we've probably sold over 24 apartment buildings in Lehigh Valley.
I remember you were in my office like 3 months ago, and we were having a conversation about your plans for the next 12 months and your acquisition and buying real estate and across the country, actually. Has
Yes.
that changed with the COVID situation?
Not really. Not really. I mean, I do think that COVID situation is, relatively speaking, a short-term impact. Everything that I'm seeing and reading, people are calling for, they refer as a V-shaped recovery. So kind of a declining GDP, in the first quarter of this year, and certainly in the second quarter. And things starting to recover in third and fourth quarter. It is not clear how fast that recovery is going to happen, but people are anticipating that if not by 2021, certainly by the end of 2022, we should be back at pre-COVID levels. Just this morning, actually, I listened to a great podcast on Tim Ferriss, of a gentleman that runs a over $100 billion hedge fund called Oaktree, and I would encourage all your listeners to listen to it. And he made a comment which makes a lot of sense. With expected discovery of vaccine or treatments for COVID, it probably is going to become a seasonal type of an issue, sort of like flu. So I think we will figure this and kind of be able to live our lives as we were prior in the long term. So my plans are long-term plans, and those have not changed. On a short-term basis, yes, I'm believing that for the most part, this is a washout year, if you will. Even though we sort of have been busy. We've sold a couple of things. We're in a contract to buy something else, and we're and also starting a development project, a large development project, relatively soon. So, but it's certainly not as busy as we were prior to COVID. So there's some adjustment, but they're mainly short-term and somewhere intermediate-term basis.
One of the things I find fascinating about you is the adventurous side of you. Your desire to climb the tallest peaks in the world. And
Yes.
who inspired you in that, like, tell us a little bit about that. Your first
So,
time you had your big challenge
so
to train for it.
sure. So prelude to climbing was actually a triathlons, believe it or not, even though it might not make sense, but it sort of went from kind of one challenging, there's another challenging event that kind of predated the climbing. And so I'll start there if you don't mind. So triathlons, I started competing in 2008. It was after the Great Recession and kind of going from 100 miles an hour, literally at times working for 4 months straight without a single day off. And I used to joke when I was in New York, we would have um, 4 shifts. We worked 4 shifts. It was pre-lunch, lunch, after dinner, after midnight. And there will often be nights that we work till like 2 a.m., and again, 7 days a week. And so it goes from that kind of pace to nothing, right? Working for a bank where, liquidity froze and there was absolutely zero lending. And so, at the beginning, it was exciting, young kid, New York City, not much to do. And we still had our corporate credit cards. So a lot of taking clients out and dinners and drinking. But after like 2, 3 months, I realized that I was drinking maybe way too much and coming home drunk or tipsy 3, 4 times a week. And I was like, this is not a good path that I want to go down. So I kind of decided to, first run and then bike, swim, and then ended up buying a bicycle and really fell in love with the bicycle. And decided to give myself a goal to compete in an Ironman competition in 3 years. And so I did first Ironman in 2010, and then did another one in 20, other Alcatraz, basically to San Francisco. Did some long distance bike riding in part of Tour de France in French Alps, and rode my bicycle from San Fran to LA. But then after 2015, I kind of was looking for a new challenge. And I got the idea after going to Nepal for my college roommate's wedding. We ended up trekking, as they call it in Nepal, part of this mountain called Annapurna Mountain, which is one of the deadliest mountains in the world, but we only tracked it around the base camp, so nothing dangerous really. But just being in presence of these, 26, 27, 28,000 feet peaks was awe-inspiring. And as I say to people, if you don't believe in God, you start to when you see Himalayas and get exposed to those massive mountains. So anyway, I got back and was the bug had bitten me. So I signed up to climb Kilimanjaro, which is the tallest mountain in Africa. And after doing that, I was totally hooked. There I was exposed to.
For that expedition?
Yeah. I mean, I had my triathlon training, and Kilimanjaro is not difficult. I would encourage people to do it. It's really very, very inspiring to do, but it's doable. It's a high altitude hike. Not really difficult, not other than the altitude. But that's why you take your time. When most people fail by trying to rush it, there's actually statistics where you can see the longer you take, higher your chances are of summiting. So people in reasonable shape, or people that want to dedicate themselves to training and preparing for that, they can absolutely do it. Anyway, so after that, I was hooked, and I saw this challenge of doing 7 summits, which was the tallest mountain on each continent. And I've done 5 so far, without Everest and without Antarctica. I'm considering doing Antarctica. I would love to see that continent. People say that it's absolutely magnificent, and compare it to as closest to being to the moon. So I would really like to experience that. And then as far as Everest, I don't think I will do it. I did Denali last year, and that was 3 weeks long expedition where you're completely off the grid. and it's a long time to being intense and out there, and Everest is even longer. It's about 45 to 60 days, and I just couldn't picture myself at this point in time. And we recently started a family. I have a young daughter, and I just couldn't imagine myself being away for those the long periods of time. But that's fine. It's
Talk
fine.
about above 15,000 feet and as things really start to change and how you can't trust your senses and how you got to have to be regimented for hydration and breathing and temperature management
Oh
and
yeah. Oh yeah. So those are very good points you're bringing up. I mean, I've done all my climbs with a single outfit out of Washington, state of Washington, Seattle, Washington, called company called Alpine Ascents. I actually found them in National Geographic. They were referenced as one of the best like Everest outfits, and their organization and their guides are impeccable. I mean, they run a very tight ship. I mean, from prep um, uh, to the expedition, and the gear list, which is often 100 plus items long, and kind of training you, where they teach you about a lot of those things you mentioned, how to layer, meaning how to stay warm, and how important that hydration is, and feeding fuel, right? Eating food is that's how you that's your fuel, and that's how you create energy, and how to sleep and altitude and all those type of things. But that doesn't stop, and that's why I love Alpine Ascents and go with them exclusively, is because that doesn't stop even on the mountains. I mean, just the last trip we did in Alaska. I mean, they're constantly checking on you, even in a subtle ways that you would know. Looking how much food did you eat, because people tend to lose the appetite and it's hard for you to eat. So they'll look at your bowl, like, did you finish your breakfast? Right? Did you finish your dinner? They're questioning you, how many liters of water did you drink? Might sound odd, but have you gone to bathroom? If you're not, going to bathroom, you're not taking enough of hydration. Things like that. How did you sleep? How much did you sleep? So it's a very very well structured plan, and I wouldn't dare to kind of do it on my own, or just with group of friends deciding, hey, let's go up and climb these mountains. But so it's with their help, and kind of with these extremely well versed and professional lead guides, that I was able to do all these things.
what's the next adventure for you?
So I'm training to go to Alps this summer, assuming that everything else holds. We're scheduled to climb highest mountain in Italy and Switzerland. In Italy, it's called Gran Paradiso, and in Switzerland, it's Mont Blanc. And then we're going to do one more mountain called Matterhorn, which is this beautiful, iconic mountain. So that's planned for end of August, beginning of September. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I would love to do Antarctica. And then after that, frankly, I don't know. I might stop climbing and look into some other challenges, but we'll see.
Okay.
I haven't decided yet.
Any other new things? Come on, you know what I'm going to ask you. Like, what's your next achievement?
Learning how to fly.
There you go. All right. Well,
That's right.
you know,
Thanks.
take
Thanks to
people,
you.
maybe a year or two, you'll have it accomplished in a month, right?
Well, I don't know. We'll see. But you told me it was easy and I believed you until I printed these two books that are each about 350, 400 pages long. It doesn't look easy, but yeah, and thanks for getting me excited about that. I really look forward to learning how to fly. I think it would be great as a lifestyle decision, but I also think it'll help my business tremendously.
Well, that'd be awesome if
Yeah,
those accomplishments come to realization. I'm sure they're going. I can't thank you enough. You're just so generous in your conversation and always being available, and
thank you.
appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Yeah, likewise.
And
Thanks for having me. And if I can be of any other help or service, you know how to find me.
I look forward to things getting back to normal and where people can socialize and enjoy themselves again. Thanks again.
Yes, thank you. Take care.